Die Learntec Ende Januar 2018 endete mit einem Besucherrekord. Als Zuschauermagnet erwies sich unter anderem Charles Jennings. Mit seiner Keynote sorgte der Lernexperte für volle Sitzreihen. Im Interview mit Managerseminare erklärt er, warum wir Lernen als Bestandteil von Arbeit betrachten müssen.
Charles, which are the most important learning trends at the moment for you?
There's a number of major learning trends, and I think one of them is people are realizing that the models that we use for the 20th century, where we took people away from work to learn and then they went back into work, really don't work in a world where change is very rapid, where we need to learn as part of work, we need to learn from work as well as learn to work. So we're seeing changes there. We're seeing that reflected in general ways, in that learning is being seen as much more micro-learning. There's a whole movement around making sure that learning resources are made available where people need them. There's this whole move from course to resource, so moving away from learning courses certainly in corporate education to using learning resources. So there's a number of changes. I guess overall there's a big change in terms of digital, moving from non-digital to a digital world, so that's huge implications for learning generally. And lastly, and I think this is most important, is that there's a refocus from learning to performance, from thinking about the process, which is what learning professionals have always done naturally, around designing, developing and delivering courses and programs, to thinking about the output, the performance. How are we going to change the performance of individuals and organizations?
What do you think about classroom-based learning? Will it disappear completely?
No, I don't think classroom learning will disappear completely, because sometimes classroom-based learning is really helpful. The problem is that we've used classroom as the only hammer for every sort of nail. So we're finding that the idea of teaching people how to do things that away from the context where they do them is extremely difficult and often doesn't work. So certainly classroom training will become less important.
You work with a framework called 70-20-10. Is this the ideal formula for how to mix the different forms of learning?
70-20-10 is a reference model or a framework. It isn't really a formula. And the idea that you should put 70% of learning into experiential learning and 20 into social and 10 into formal, of course, is crazy. What it really is it's a performance framework to say that if you want to improve individual performance, team performance and organizational performance, we need to look beyond the classroom, beyond formal, because actually most learning that occurs within the workplace. So we need to refocus, and 70-20-10 is more than anything, it's a change model to help organizations move from pure classroom-based learning to a much richer learning provision to focused on outputs. And so the question I often get asked is, should it be 70-20-10? Of course not. It's simply it's a metaphor more than anything else.
Are companies today doing enough to support informal learning, in your opinion?
Organizations are just, I think, a lot are just starting to get their arms around this and starting to do it. But overall, I think many organizations still can't separate learning from schooling. As my colleague Jay Cross always said, you know, the problems with most managers is that they can't separate learning from schooling. And actually, in the world of work, learning is not about schooling. Learning is about doing challenging work, reflecting on that work, having the opportunities to practice, those sorts of things, and sharing with colleagues. Those sorts of things are really the key components of learning. In fact, I always break down learning and development and improving performance into 4 areas. We learn through rich and challenging experiences. We learn through the opportunities to practice. We learn through sharing and conversations. And actually, conversation is probably the greatest learning technology that's ever been invented. And we learn through reflection, whether we just reflect ourselves on what we've done, how we've done it, whether we could do it better, or we reflect with our colleagues in terms of a discussion, you know, within a group. So those four elements of learning: experience, practice, conversations and networks and reflection are really critical. And so when I talk to organisations about 70-20-10, I focus them on those four and say, how can you exploit all of those? If you exploit all of those and use the 70-20-10 methodology in terms of making sure that you're designing the learning around those key factors, those output factors, then you'll be successful.
Is this a way to create a culture of learning in companies?
Absolutely. And I think my idea of a culture of learning, or the 70-20-10 perspective of a culture of learning, may be different to others. It's not that people are learning all the time. Well, of course they are. Everyone learns all the time anyway. It's around, are we helping our organisations to learn better? In other words, are they more agile? Do they respond to change more rapidly? Are they able to reflect on what's happened and adapt and adjust? Because in today's world, organisations that don't adapt to change, that aren't agile, that aren't lean, all those sorts of things, are not learning organisations. I think Peter Senge, who created the term learning organisation more than 20 years ago now, was onto something, but I think Senge was focused more around how can we help people learn all the time, because 20 years ago, the idea of learning was classroom-based formal learning. You know, we go on a program, we attend a course or a class. Whereas learning now is about how can we help our organisations learn to become either more efficient, more effective, more competitive, or whatever it is that they need to do.